So I'm Marie-Andrée Pelland. I'm a professor of criminology, but today I will act as the president of Info-Secte. And we would like to talk about the history of Info-Secte because we will be in 2 years, 45 years old. So we will talk about it and we analyze the history of the group and how we change through the years. And I'm today with Mike Kropveld, who is the founder and the director of Info-Secte. So we have two objectives today: recognize significant period of Info-Secte, Info-Secte history, and analyze the organization. Because to know if our organization is healthy, we have to analyze what we've done and how we done it.
That's to start is to give an idea of where we come from. And the experience that I went through was based on an experience of a close friend of mine who got involved with the Unification Church, which has better known at that period of time as the Moonies. His involvement led to a number of friends and family deciding after quite a process to kidnap, deprogram him out of the Unification Church. At that time, one of our close friends was a journalist in the now defunct Montreal Star, who was given the funding to come down and was involved in the whole process. He at that time wrote a 6-part series based on the experiences of my friend when we went through to get him out, and was the first major expose dealing with kind of the cult phenomena in Canada. That led to an increased number of interest on the part of the public, other media to cover this story. And subsequent to that, the journalist actually, he wrote a book called Moonweb Journey into the Mind of a Cult, which is still available today. And subsequent to that was made into a major motion picture called Ticket to Heaven, which won in 1981 Best Picture of the Year in Canada, the Genie Award, which is still available if you want on YouTube. Because of the importance of the story that came out and the first time that it happened in Canada, we ended up getting a lot of requests through the journalists and the media from families, friends, wanting information and help with what they consider to be similar situations. At that time, a number of us who were involved in the whole story decided to form a kind of volunteer part-time organization to respond to the questions and concerns that the public had. We quickly realized that there was a major amount of need in this area, and we subsequently looked for a way to get funding to start up a full-time center. And so this started in 1978, but in 1980, we were able to get some funding, which happened through the Jewish community of Montreal.
No, I'm too fast?
No, it's
okay.
Okay. And we started up Info-Secte, or Cult Project, as we were known at that time, to respond to the needs of the public, and looked at the different objectives which we had. The objectives of the organization that we have today is pretty much the same thing, other than that our scope is much broader than it was at that time. We respond to questions and need from across the province of Quebec, requests that come to us from across the country, as well as requests that we receive internationally. Our organization is a bilingual organization, French and English. I add that only because depending on which country you're in, when you say bilingual, I guess if we're in the States, bilingual assumes Spanish and English. Bilingual French and English in Quebec. And so we reach a large population outside of the country as well, and sometimes from other European French-speaking countries. And as I said, the objectives are pretty much maintained over the years since our beginning.
At the beginning, there weren't a lot of research on cults. So we were trying to talk about the techniques, the approach, and the coercion used in cultic groups. So a first pamphlet was done and distributed all around Quebec during the 1980 and 1990. As you can see, is dated because we talk about peer pressure, guilt, fear. So this is still over there, fatigue, disinhibition, love bombing, we have a lot, some knowledge about that at the time, and removal of privacy. So the techniques are still there. But when you look at the approaches, because they were in the internet at that time, so we talk about they were recruiting at school, they were recruiting with businesses. So maybe the approaches change, but the technique of coercion, as you can see, are still the same. We were also trying in the 1980 and 1990 to build knowledge in the community about cults. And so we promote some research projects, such as research about cult in the French-speaking community. We did research about nonprofit and charitable organization. How do organizations ask for money? Is it cultic or not? So we were trying to also have research on consumer-related difficulty. As a consumer, can I be recruited by new religious movement or organization that hide their purpose? We also had the radioscopie d'une France sectaire, and also we built a first course in high school in Quebec. So it was really the beginning to inform people about cult.
One of the things from the beginning, we had very simple premise, which is that everyone had the right to believe and belong to whatever group they wanted. Did the group or organization have the right to do what they wanted was clearly another question. So a lot of our focus was also to have an organization that was transparent, that worked out of a fixed location, which people could actually reach us easily. Because at that time, there was also a fair amount of paranoia that existed within people who came out of groups and fear of organizations coming after them. But our focus initially was always to be an open, transparent organization, and the organization itself from day one counseled against kidnapping deprogrammings, even though we initially had done that with a close friend of ours. Interestingly, and why we counseled against it is when we went through the whole experience with our friend, is that the information was very limited, and the people you ended up talking to said, your friend is brainwashed, the only way you're going to get him out of a group is to kidnap him. Subsequent to the whole experience, what we learned about was that there were other ways people left organizations and groups, so that from day one, when our organization started, we counseled against the physical deprogramming of people and encouraged people to work in other areas to develop contact communications to help people necessarily leave organizations. And so one of the important things for us as well, as Marie-Andrée mentioned, was to develop tools of information to help people have a better understanding from our perspective of what the phenomena was, what the issues were. And fortunately, in the early 2000s, we were able to get funding from the government that helped us to produce the book, Le Phénomène des Sectes, or the Cult Phenomena, How Groups Function. I think an important element and focus of our organization is looking at how groups function. We tend to stay away from simple labeling. We do not have a list of so-called cults. When people call us and ask us, is X group or Y group a cult or not? Our question ultimately is, what are you looking for and how can that help you? As I learned from a close colleague of mine, Michael Langoni, former executive director of ICSA, he would often say, well, if I told you it wasn't a cult, would you now say the situation was okay? And most people, when they ask that question, would say, no, because I'm concerned about X, Y, Z. So our focus has always been to look at what are your concerns and how can we best address and help you deal with it, and look at the strategies that can help you approach it, which is one of the things we did in terms of writing this book, as well as providing, I think, an important section which looked at how other countries and governments dealt with this issue. Because often when you're dealing with situations in this area, people like to pinpoint other countries as being either more advanced or further behind, without taking into context the cultural, legal, and religious history and experience with different cultic phenomena in their country. And so this book, by the way, is available still on our website. You can download it for free. We're, as I mentioned, thanks to the government of Canada, we're able to translate the book, and God help in terms of publishing it as well.
There's also a section on right and liberty. So it's kind of an education. What are your rights? What can you do to exercise your freedom? The other thing that we are preoccupied with is the prevention of victimization. So we did a lot of information about groups and talking about how they became violent, how suicide arrived in the group, how sexual victimization arrived within the group, and how some member had a wonderful experience and some other member didn't. So to recognize that experience within a group can vary from one person to another, and how the experience of one group is different from one another. So we are there, we respond to people, and we use example vignette of all of these groups to educate people on how victimization is possible and how they could intervene is those kind of situation also. The other thing that we also did, and we frequently think about that question is our name a problem? Info-Cult, is this the right name for our organization? If we use cult, do we stigmatize people who call us, who want services from us? But you know, after 35 years that we are known for Info-Cult, it's difficult to change our name because we don't want people to have difficulty to reach us. So what we did in 2003, we say, oh, maybe we will use another name. So we record Institute for the Study of Cult and New Religious Movement, but we never used it. After that, there were another phrase that we say, okay, maybe we can find another name. So we use a subtitle to describe the activity of our group. And in English, it's Center for Assistance and for the Study of Cultic Phenomenon. And it's on our website. But because we are still well known with Info-Cult, we keep using it and describe it what we do in the same time. And we have also the name in French, but I won't read it today.
Just to follow up on that as well, is it does give us the opportunity to talk to people who call us to explain why we're called Info-Cult, what we really do, and what our approach is. And the reality is, I think when we first addressed the question of name change, it was a period where, you know, our cult's still an issue. And now with all the documentaries, books, testimonies that are coming out, it basically gives people an access to finding us more easily and allows us, as Marie-Andrée mentioned, the ability to present who we are and what our views are. And over the years also, one of the things that we have worked on in terms of developing, as Marie-Andrée mentioned, the question of accumulating knowledge and more information, we have developed very strong contacts with organizations and individuals in this area around the world. We meet since 2009 with organizations in Europe, the organization Inform based out of the UK, the Belgian Center CISA, Centre d'Information et Assistance sur les Organisations Sectaires Nuisibles. They don't have a name in English, and it would be also as long as their name in French, probably. And as well as the center in Switzerland out of Geneva, which is the Information Center on New Religious Movements. And we meet annually as well as often in between to exchange information, to learn how other organizations function. We also participate in conferences and meetings with a variety of different organizations and groups that have different and diverse perspectives and points of view on this issue. I would almost say is many times we will say we agree to disagree with people, but we're always willing to listen and hear what people have to say. And just because we do meet with organizations that are also controversial to some people does not mean we accept everything the group does. Basically for us is to get information. And in some cases, just to go on a tangent a bit, there are a couple of organizations that we've had contact with that are very controversial that have helped us because of the contact to solve family problems. Because some of the organizations tend to view us as having a lot of power and influence. I guess the power and influence that we do have is the ability to speak out if needed and reach the media, which can be detrimental to the functioning of certain organizations, so that often that is beneficial for people seeking financial reimbursements or establishing contact with somebody or getting an organization to respond to their needs and interests. So it kind of a double-edged sword, but our focus has always been open to dialogue with different organizations and people. But very importantly, we also have been involved throughout our history in helping people who've been harmed and victimized by different organizations and groups. The case mentioned here, Médecins du Ciel, which is literally they didn't really have that name. It's kind of like they're called Doctors from Heaven, was a name given to them by the media. These were people who channeled what they claimed to be as if it was a doctor and gave out medical advice. 4 people died as a result of their advice. Our involvement led to a wide amount of publicity and media coverage. Sadly, it didn't get criminal prosecutions, of the individuals involved, but it led to simply kind of a case where they were fined for illegal practice of medicine. But we have been involved in other situations where we've done reports to governments, like on alternative therapies, and other situations where we've been called upon and involved in cases which are pretty high profile. On our website, on the government reports section, you can read certain reports dealing with groups you may have heard about, like Leftor, which was a group that was situated in Montreal, Canada, moved to Ontario, moved to Mexico, Guatemala, where there have been a number of cases where youth protection have been involved. So we've been involved in a number of these cases. Some have been public and some have not been that public. But ultimately, we have always tried to work with individuals who've been harmed in terms of giving them the access if they want, seeking justice. This has not gone without certain controversy or problems on our part. When we first started, like many organizations in this area, I have to say we were a bit more militant or aggressive in our approach. And so we did end up, even in that period, I would have to say, when we were much more aggressive, we did have contact with certain controversial groups. We never, said no to meeting with people, but we did have in the early years frequent demonstrations, specifically by Church of Scientology, and later on by a combination of the Church of Scientology and the Raelian movement, which is a UFO-based group. And we also had, I'd say, attempts which worked on a certain part of them trying to block funding that from agencies where we were trying to get funding. We had huge document which we were once shown about yay thick, I'd say 2 or 3 inches thick, that claimed that Info-Cult was part of an international criminal organization or conspiracy. It had about 2 pages in there dealing with Info-Cult on a case which had no relevance to our organization. But the controversy is at that point something that did impede us from getting funding from an organization we were seeking. The demonstrations and attack by organizations, whether it be in the media or in text, pretty much I say since probably since 2005, no longer go on, which we functioned initially in downtown Montreal. We moved to another location further away, and in a building where I had no idea what's going on in the street. So it was basically our neighbors telling us if there was a demonstration going on. And when it stopped, one of the neighbors said to me, as a side note, there was a bit of excitement. How come, are they going to come back and demonstrate in front of your office again? And I said, I don't know, you should ask them. But we haven't had that, like I said, since the early 2000s, because a lot of our focus doesn't really label specific groups, but deals with specific issues of harm and the phenomena as a whole. But that was a bit of a tumultuous period in our history, to say the least, because it was coming close to whether or not we would be able to continue getting funding. I should mention at this point, our funding, in majority of our funding comes from the provincial government, Quebec provincial government, Ministry of Health and Social Services, as well as donations. And we are very fortunate for that support as the only organization, I think, in North America that receives government funding. I do say that with a bit of tongue in cheek, because generally the funding from government is just in Canada. Americans, US doesn't really fund organizations of our nature at all. But we are, I say, very fortunate to have that kind of support from our government.
That's silly, Mike.
Okay. Oh, sorry. So also one of the things I think, as I mentioned, in terms of work that we do with former members and the help to the public as well, is we offer, thanks to the support of professionals who volunteer their time, we operate support groups for former members, one in English and one in French, that are animated by professionals. We also, that started in 2018 and continues at the start of the pandemic, now online. And since then, we've also instituted another support group for families and friends. That one just runs at this time just in French. And the people that come to this group are former members of a variety of different organizations and high control groups. and come from the Montreal area as well as from beyond. And for some people who have to be bilingual, they can come to both our support groups. And it's something that's been very, I think, beneficial for them. Just a side note, I just found out actually, one of our animators is here at the conference. I've never met her because I don't deal with the support kind of groups of our organization, but it was a real pleasure to meet her. She's one of the volunteers that kind of animates our English support groups.
So how did we transform as an organization over the 43 last year? I will say that because since the beginning, we refused to use the programming technique that set us apart from the other organization at the time. And our main goals since the beginning are the same. We are an information center. So we give information to everyone who asks us. So we have student, professor, former members, they even, do I forget someone? In media, yeah, for sure. Merci, Antoine. And we don't talk about cult. We don't name group as cult. We talk about group functioning. And when people call, we try to help them to analyze their own group. We don't give them answer. We want them to develop their own perspective about the group that they want to join, the group that they are part of, or the group that they left. We also want to help people to understand the diversity of experiences that are within a cult. It's not because you are all part of a same group that you will have the same experiences. That's why I think we can say that we have an individualized perspective. So we help people to understand their own experiences without giving name to that experiences. We are there to help them with their needs. And also we want to avoid stigmatization because it won't help them to have the perspective that they were on a cult, but it will help them to understand their experiences. So that's why also we meet with groups, we discuss with them, we go to conference when they are, we sit with them because we never know, as Mike has said, someday we can help a former member to do mediation with his former group. So we never cut ties in that way. So building relationship with researcher is also important because we want to gather as much as information and we want and to stay up to date with the knowledge. This year we gave training to a social worker to better intervene in situations. So in the years to come, I think it will be one of our area where we'll be more proactive. Did I forget something?
I forgot something. I also want to mention, because we talk a lot about information, but Info-Cult houses probably one of the largest information centers in terms of documentation in North America, which is accessible to the public. And one of the projects that we're working on is to make this more accessible so that people can get an idea of what we have online. Presently, there is still a fair amount of information that we possess that is online in terms of the books, documentaries. We have started to digitalize our video collection and are going to be working on digitalizing the audio collection as well as a number of other moves that we have in plan to make this information accessible. Our collection also has information that comes from a variety of sources. It's books, personal testimonies, legal documents, government reports, videos, documentaries, as I mentioned, of diverse kind of perspective from, and I think houses probably one of the more varied collections that exists, which is open, as well as we offer it in English and in French, with a smattering for those that want to research in other languages as well. So we've collected quite a bit of information, some of it going back to the early 1900s, primary source information, because as much as, documents that deal with personal testimonies, I think are powerful, having group literature that describes their own history, their own movement, and changes over time. And I mentioned that as one group that is interesting that I recall is we have a large collection of information on Jehovah's Witnesses. And we've had in the past, actually, I remember a member come in who wanted access to material that they couldn't have access because the group had no longer publishing it and making it available to members. So that's why information becomes so important. People sometimes downplay it, but I think sometimes primary source information is more valuable than the critical information that you see put out in the media. But we are also very responsive in terms of trying to help media and organizations in terms of providing, I'd say, a broader perspective on this issue in light of the fact that it tends to be a much more sensationalistic kind of phenomena, which sadly doesn't help people, I think, on the outside gain a broader understanding of who joins, why they join, and the impact that these movements can have. I think we have 4 minutes left, so that we wanted to leave a few minutes over for questions or discussions before the session ends.